The Etruscans were an ancient people of central Italy whose art bridged the worlds of Greece and Rome. Known for their lively tomb paintings, distinctive sculpture, and exquisite metalwork, they created a visual culture that celebrated daily life, honored the dead, and expressed beliefs unique to their civilization. In this video, we'll explore the art that defined the Etruscans and the legacy they left behind. The Etruscans were a culture that lived in the Italian peninsula and dominated the culture there in the 8th, 7th, and 6th centuries. The Etruscans predated the Romans in terms of their rule of the Italian peninsula. And this is a culture that was very powerful due to their mining. They mined tin, iron, copper, and silver. The Etruscans controlled the city of Rome itself, so Rome was under Etruscan rule for some time under initially a king named Tarquinius Priscus. His grandson Tarquinius Superbus and his sister Tullia killed their spouses so they could consolidate their power, and then they killed their father and they took over Rome. This was a brutal murder of their father. Very famously, Tullia ran over her father in the streets of Rome with a chariot, splattering blood everywhere. Is the story. This is a lovely way to get our talk about the Etruscans started. And then her brother, Tarquinius Superbus, was driven out of Rome in 509 BC, and the Romans installed the Roman Republic. The Etruscans existed at the same time as the Greek, Archaic, Classical, and Hellenistic periods. And we're going to see a lot of similarity between the two cultures, but we will also see some significant differences. Etruscan culture was very similar to Greek culture in many, many ways, religiously especially. The Greek gods and Etruscan gods are very similar. They have slightly different names, but their religious practices and beliefs were very similar. However, there are significant differences in their temples as well as similarities. This is a typical Etruscan temple, and you can see, I think, the Greek influence. We have the pitched roof, we have a pediment, we have what appear to be Doric-style columns. However, this is not a peripteral or a peristyle structure, meaning there's not a colonnade surrounding the building as we would have seen in Greek structures. Also, Etruscan structures often sat on a platform that you're not seeing here that Greek temples did not. The columns themselves are actually what we call a Tuscan column. Tuscany, of course, is a place in Italy now, and it is what used to be Etruria, or the Etruscan realm. So Etruscan, Tuscan, you can see how the names sort of morph. So this is actually called the Tuscan style. These columns are made with wood as opposed to the Greek Doric columns, which would have been made with marble. In fact, this entire temple are primarily wood and terracotta, so that is a significant difference between Greek and Etruscan art, are the materials. Greeks were using marble by the Archaic period. The Etruscans were still using wood and terracotta, which is a form of clay. Also, you'll notice that there is no relief sculpture in any metopes or triglyphs, because there are no metopes between the triglyphs, because there are no triglyphs. There are no friezes whatsoever on these Etruscan temples, and so instead statuary was placed on top. Speaking of sculpture, let's now take a look at some Etruscan sculpture. This is a typical Etruscan sculpture. You can see the similarities with the Greek archaic sculpture. They both have those archaic faces with the bulging eyes and that archaic smile. There is also a similarity in the anatomy. Both the Greeks and the Etruscans were close observers of human anatomy, but there are some key differences. So first of all, the material. Our Greek sculpture is a marble sculpture, and the Etruscan is terracotta, so this low-fired clay. Also, the position of the bodies are very different. On the Greek sculpture in the Archaic period, we still see this strong Egyptian influence with the left foot sticking straight out in the body, rigid with the arms at the side, and this bilateral symmetry. So it's basically the same on either side, except for the foot sticking out. The Etruscans had a very different approach to the human form. They wanted their bodies to move. And so there's a liveliness and a life like quality, a naturalism, if you will, to the Etruscan sculpture. This is how people move. We lean forward. So gone is that sort of rigid, weird Egyptian hokey pokey, and instead we see a real sort of thrust forward. We also see the addition of a base at the bottom to support the sculpture, much like in the marble copies of Greek originals that we have studied before. Otherwise, there's very similarities in the hairstyle. Also, a huge difference. The Etruscan sculpture is clothed, as was the norm for most cultures in this area at the time, with the exceptions of the Greeks, because the Greeks loved that human body. Etruscans also had different burial practices than the Greeks. Etruscans often buried their dead in very elaborate tombs, whereas Greeks never really did this. The wealthy Etruscans buried their dead in these tumuli, these large tombs that are very similar to a tholos from Mycenaean culture, those beehive tombs that we studied. These are large. These are 130 feet or so in diameter and 50 feet tall. This is a sarcophagus, a structure that holds a coffin. We've seen sarcophagi dating all the way back to ancient Egypt. This, you see an Etruscan couple lounging, having dinner. This would have been a common sight for dinner in Etruscan homes, where you lounged while you ate. You would have people over, you would talk, and you would conversate. This is what is happening here. You can see the motion of the woman's hands and the man's hands as if they are engaged in conversation. You can see those archaic faces, but in many ways there's a liveliness and a casualness to the bodies that the Greeks would have never really embraced, especially in this archaic period where sculptures tend to look rather stiff. One of the key differences, though, is the way the woman is treated here socially. Greeks would have never allowed this kind of thing to happen. Greek men and women often lived very separate and segregated lives. Women weren't given a lot of power in ancient Greek culture. It was very much a male-dominated society, and the Greeks were horrified by the way Etruscan women had a certain amount of power. Now, certainly we're not looking at a pure equality here, but like in Egypt, we often see women alongside men and conversing with men in a way that would not have been allowed in Greek society. And Etruscans were sort of notorious in Greek eyes for the vocality of their women and letting and how women spoke their minds in the Etruscan culture. And this kind of goes back to my story about the daughter of the king who kills him in this horrific way, but it sort of shows the boldness of Etruscan women. Now, not all Etruscan women were committing patricide, so, you know, wipe that from your mind, but certainly there is a different social dynamic. The Greek Theopompus talks about how horrified he was, though, by the way Etruscan men just allowed their women to express opinions and talk to people freely, and how they could go to dinner with their men, and how they could attend sporting events, and even how wives were honored along with husbands when children were given awards. So like if a soldier was rewarded for his bravery, and both of his parents would be mentioned in that honorary and that honoring of the soldier. So let's look inside the rest of some of these tombs. There's a volcanic rock that's prevalent through large parts of Italy called Tufa, T-U-F-A, and that is what makes up the rock here. It's also what we're going to find under the surface of Rome. Tufa is fairly easy to carve, and so these tombs of these elite Etruscans who were very wealthy and powerful because of metal mining were quite elaborate. But whereas like their Egyptian counterparts, the Etruscans believed the afterlife was very similar to this life, and you had to prepare for it, and you had to pack for it. The Egyptians treated their tombs in many ways sort of like storerooms, where you would kind of store your goods, and then you could use that stuff later in the afterlife. But the Etruscan tombs, at least for the very wealthy, were like homes. They were decorated, they had furniture, they had beds, they had kitchens, they had all the kinds of things you would want in a home. The furniture and the decorations were made from either carving the tufa or made by adding terracotta, wet clay, and then letting it dry to the surface. You can see by the plan on the right that this is laid out just like a home, that we have a sort of a living room with chairs, we have bedrooms with beds, so this is home sweet home for the dead. This is from the tomb of the Leopards. This is a fresco. Frescoes we have seen in this area dating all the way back to the ancient Minoans. The Greeks in the archaic period would not have had these kinds of frescoes, though. So this is an example where the Etruscans had a technology and an artistic ability that the Greeks didn't have at this time. The Greeks didn't have the resources or the know-how to do something like this in the archaic. They would soon surpass their Etruscan neighbors, but this you wouldn't see this kind of decoration at this period in ancient Greece. This is called the Tomb of the Leopards because of this pediment area, which depicts two leopards in this heraldic stance that we have seen dating all the way back thousands of years at this point to the ancient Mesopotamians. But once again, look at sort of the liveliness of the figures here. You'll notice also that we see men and women, men portrayed with dark skin, women with light skin. So this is a artistic device that we have seen dating all the way back to the ancient Minoans. So, you know, at this point, this is a 800, 900 plus year technique. And once again, there's that liveliness. The figures are gesturing and sort of really talking with their hands here. If we look at this particular fresco from Tarquinia, this is from the tomb of the Augur. You'll notice there's two guys standing on either side of the door, two attendants with their hands in what would have been seen as a common greeting, with their heads on their hands on their heads. If we look to the right, we can see two wrestlers, nude wrestling, just like the Greek athletes performed in the nude, so did the Etruscans. So we have kind of a sporting events all along this particular wall. With the exception in the far left, this is an image of the dead. This is an augur. This is a priest, we can tell by his curved staff. And down here we see a person wearing black. This is a mourner who is mourning the death of this guy here. On the far right of this image, we see something rather disturbing. We see a guard with a man who is bound by ropes, whose head is covered with a cloth, who is being mauled by a dog. This was part of a blood sport. The Etruscans, like later on the Romans do, loved to witness gladiatorial combat. They loved to see men fight animals, men fight each other, to the point that blood was drawn, and that is what you are seeing here. This man is having to fight this animal. He has a club, but he also can't see the animal. Etruscans were not only master sculptors when it came to using terracotta, but also with metalworking, and in fact, they were quite advanced in terms of their metal smithing and metalworking, and rivaled the Greeks at this point. Sure, this is from the classical period, so we're dealing with something that's a little more realistic, but we still see some of that stylization. This is a chimera. Chimeras were from Greek mythology. They're these creatures that are made up of lions and snakes and serpents and goats, and there are these fierce beasts that are kind of represent sort of this unnatural coming together of these animals. The term chimera has come to describe really any sort of composite animal, but this is a depiction of the original chimera from Greek mythology, the one that was slain by the hero Bellerophon from his mount, the flying horse Pegasus. In fact, if we look closely at the goat, you can see the wound created from the Greek hero. There's an inscription on the lion's paw that has been translated various ways, but most scholars agree that says to Tenea. Tenea was the Etruscan sky god. So once again, we have that close observation. We have this incredible bronze work. Once again, lost wax technique. We see the musculature of the lion underneath, the way it leans forward and kind of braces itself with its haunches. We see these wrinkles in its nose. It would have had originally eyes and teeth made either from ivory or perhaps seashell. But there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of desperation almost in this face that I think is just absolutely exquisite, and like nothing we would ever see, at least in this period, in Greek art. It's exquisite observation and craftsmanship. But then there's other places where reality has kind of been thrown out the window, and we see this very stylized fur around its neck that is not realistic at all. And it's not because the artist couldn't obviously make realistic looking image, but because they wanted this kind of stylization there because they liked it. This is sort of at the end of the Etruscan era. This is in the you're looking at a Hellenistic sculpture, and so like Greek Hellenistic sculpture, you're looking at emotion, you're looking at images of sorrow. And these sarcophagus lids give us a good idea of what Etruscan life was like. And once again, we see that Etruscan realism or verism in this image of this couple. A lot of care has been taken to show their sort of love for each other. We see a kind of interaction, a romantic interaction here that we don't see in Greek art. There's something very sort of sweet about the way this couple embraces each other in death. And then you also see there's a very fine detail in portraying the sheets over their bodies. This is stone, and yet we see the outline of their bodies underneath the sheet as if it is made of linen or some other sort of cloth. Etruscan art gives us a vivid glimpse into a culture that thrived between the Greeks and the Romans, yet had a distinct voice of their own. They created vibrant tomb paintings, expressive sculpture, and masterful metalwork, and Etruscans celebrated both the pleasures of life as well as exploring the mysteries of death. It is this vibrancy and vivacity of Etruscan art that will forever be its legacy. Well, that's all I have for you this week. Join us next time for another video. And if you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. See you soon.